Well, hello and a very warm welcome to the sixth and final episode of the lockdown tapes here at Trap to Line. The lockdown for greyhound racing is over. We last raced on Monday, the 23rd of March, and 10 weeks later, we race tomorrow. I'm Dave Clark, he's Matt Newman, and the other person you can see, the gentleman you can see on your screen, is Mark Bird, the Managing Director of the Greyhound Board of Great Britain. Mark, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, Dave. Hi, Matt.
Evening.
We're going to fire all sorts of questions at you, Mark. So we thank you for your time. I'm sure you've been very, very busy with, of course, the return to racing tomorrow. It was always on the cards, kind of, but it was rubber stamped by the announcement from the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport yesterday.
Indeed. I mean, first of all, we've all got to be absolutely chuffed to bits that this is going to happen tomorrow. I mean, as I've been banging on for a number of weeks now, we were the last sport to operate behind closed doors, and we're going to be the first race tomorrow at Nottingham, as you said. Sorry, not at Nottingham, at Perry Bar, and then obviously we moved to Central Park soon after. So it's great to be back, but it's been a long haul to get there, even though we've been shut down for 10 weeks or so.
Now, obviously unprecedented times, but it feels a success in a strange way in that we are back racing at the very first possible moment.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there's been a lot of hard work. I can't impress that on people enough, really. A lot of hard work going into making sure that we were going to be first across the line, because there's been much speculation about what was going to happen with a lot of major sports. Greyhound racing, unsurprisingly, didn't feature in most of the conversations that were being had in terms of the news, but I can tell you that there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes, not only with DCMS, the government department, but also with DEFRA, who we normally report to. So things like the operational plan, which perhaps we'll touch on a little bit later on in the programme, it's taken an awful lot of work to get that right, because it wasn't so much about DCMS and the culture minister, the sports minister, saying you've got a green light. They very rarely do that. It's more around the fact that your plan isn't fit for purpose. And that would have been the problem that would have had going into trying to race behind closed doors. But we're there. As I said, we are the first one to start back.
Absolutely. 10:21 a.m. Perry Bar tomorrow morning. So I mentioned March 23rd, Monday, March the 23rd was our last race. Could you perhaps maybe take us on a little timeline from there to where we are now ready to race? Obviously, there was a suspension of racing that evening. Boris Johnson, made that statement, which was basically the country being locked down. Take it away. I mean, I know we could perhaps start with the releasing of funds, because I know that you straight away acted very quickly. I spoke to a lot of trainers. They were very happy that the support was effective, efficient, and it was accessible.
Yeah, it was an easy call for the board to make. Realistically, we have funds. We did realise what the situation was. As you said, Dave, we were in unprecedented times. No one has ever lived through this before. We knew straight away that money would stop going to, first, the betting shops. So therefore, it follows that it won't be going to bookmakers. It won't be going to the promoters, and it won't be going to trainers. And so the concerns that we had were tenfold, really. That included things like, would owners continue to stick by their trainers? And I mean, I'm hugely grateful for the fact that they did. So they continued making payments. Some of those kennel bills were reduced, but they did that. Same with some of the tracks. The tracks stepped up and continued to pay trainers as well. And so it only seemed right and proper that the fact that we have got cash reserves, that the Greyhound board should be doing that as well. On the face of it, I know there was a bit of derision about it, the fact that we were only paying 50 pence per dog per day. But as you well know, that over the last 2 months, we've paid over £500,000 to trainers to try and help, not to cover their costs, but try and help the welfare payments for their dogs. So that was.
And there were payments made. Sorry, Mark, to dogs in training, as well as payments made to dogs in retirement branches.
And also, well, first of all, with trainers, it was dogs that were in training, clearly, but it also included if they had pups, and there are quite a few trainers out there that have pups as well, and also the retired dogs that they have in their kennels. And then as time moved on, and again, perhaps we'll get into that a bit later on, but we started making payments to the Greyhound Trust kennels as well. So we were talking about a substantial amount of money going into trying to help, not solve, but help the problem.
Okay, so we went from trying to steady the ship, and I think doing a pretty good job in that, to then setting up this working group, whereas then we're then looking forward to how we can start racing again when it's safe to do so.
There's been lots of questions about who is this mysterious working group. Okay, these were board directors and Paul Illingworth, who's a senior stipe. He obviously knows very, very much about racing. They sat down to start to, I kept calling it a choreograph, because actually all this really is, this operational plan, is about how a stadia will stage, well, first of all, the trials, and they've done that over the last 2 weeks. And I'm incredibly pleased to say that they've done very, really well in terms of that. But then going beyond that, it's obviously to racing, which will start tomorrow. So that's all the plan was, all it really was about, was trying to get a choreograph set up for a stadia, regardless of which one of the 19 tracks they're going to be racing would need to do to actually make sure that they were adhering to government advice. That's all it was.
Okay, well, we'll perhaps come on to that a little bit later on, because you touched on it there. It was quite a subject, should we say, that did the rounds on social media, that there was no trainer or owner input on that working group. But we'll come back to that, because I do want to mention about the stipendiary stewards, because I know a lot of them have worked very hard maintaining the network of support for trainers, to making sure everyone is okay, getting the money, and everything is essentially all right at the kennel.
That was a really big push on the part of the stewards to make sure that, I mean, they're normally seen as friend and foe. You know, they're there as a regulatory role, but they're also there to try and support trainers as well. And I think in this particular case, you know, the message that went out to them, which was re-endorsed by them, was the fact that, look, again, we didn't know what trainers and owners were going to be doing with their dogs. We didn't know if we were going to get a mass exodus for people packing up. I mean, none of us knew how long this was going to go on for. So from the steward's point of view, it really was to touch base with them at a very early stage to say, look, we're here to help. We want to know what the situation is with regards to how many dogs you've got in your kennels. What's the situation with those dogs going back to, are they racers, are they pups, or are they retired? What support you're getting from your owners. And you know as well as I do today, there's a lot of people out there who are of training age, are quite old, if I'm honest. And so, you know, what concerns have they got as trainers? So really it was to try and give them a belt and braces approach to making sure that they're okay. And that included obviously going on to, as we've already covered, the welfare payments as well. So the stewards stepped away from the regulatory more into the supportive role, which is exactly what we asked them to do. And I'm really grateful for the work they did.
Excellent. And after that, tell us a little bit, without drilling down too much into it, about the operational policy, the operational plan, which was basically the blueprint for how ground racing can start back up.
Okay, so it's set over 5 phases. Tomorrow starts phase 2. Phase 1 was trialing, and then you get to phases 3, 4, and 5, which are basically just the amount of time that's left between races. Phase 5 is actually a return to normality. So that's when we got people back through the doors, and we are back to what we would all understand and recognise as greyhound racing. So it really is just taking the government advice, all the advice that they've given and the restrictions around that, and trying to, as I said before, turn that into a dance plan really for what happens at a race meeting. Now, the last 2 weeks have been brilliant. We've really gone through it, or I say we have. I've been sat here, but all the staff have been out there, along with stadia staff, along with trainers, along with kennel hands. They've made it work, okay? And there's been different types of trial out there. There's been mixed trials, just to get them to the stage where trainers and kennel hands feel comfortable with what they're doing around the social distancing aspect. And then tomorrow, obviously, we see an increase in that, because you're going to have more trainers, more dogs. I'll be very surprised if we don't see any 6-dog races, because that's, you know, there are plenty of dogs out there. And so, you know, realistically, when the cameras are on tomorrow, we should be seeing something which completely mirrors what that plan is. And that's hugely important, because the eyes will be on the industry to make sure we're doing the right thing. And that includes government departments as well. And we've got wind of the fact that they will be watching and making sure that we are abiding by our plan. And that's what they've always asked us to do.
Yep, and rightly so as well, really, because we want people to be to be safe at the tracks while they're working. You mentioned that the welfare payments have gone beyond £500,000, and you know, a lot of trainers have been very complimentary about that was put into place. But I just want to talk about funds at the GBG, because I know that there was reserves in place, and sort of drilling down into the BGRF reserve funds, have kind of been floating around £1 million the last couple of years. 2018 around about 1.2 million, 2019 800,000. I suppose the obvious question is, how much damage has been done to the reserve? How much is left in the kitty?
Well, I'm not taking you out for a drink, Dave. That's
Right.
for sure. So, look, we've been very frugal over the last couple of years. We had a big couple of projects that were on the burner in terms of the retirement fund that we wanted to bring into place, and also in relation to, obviously, we've got the BSI kennel standards. So all the residential kennels have to abide by the BSI standards that were worked on a couple of years ago. And so we built up funds, even though we're not for profit. We through the accountants, we were able to channel funds across on the pretense they were going to be spent in 2020. So yeah, it's fair to say we've made a big dent into that, but that doesn't mean to say that things can't still happen. It may mean that some of the projects that we want to do will be put off for a little bit, but because of we've done what we've done around the finances, I think we're going to come out the other side, hopefully the same as trainers and owners. Looking forward to the sport ahead.
I'm glad you didn't delve too much into the answer there, because you would have sabotaged some of the question a little bit later on. Just quickly, I wanted to ask you, the IGB, they directed the funds that they made available. They went directly to owners with an option for them to be paid to the trainer. Was that considered by the GBGB, or was it always going to be, look, this is where the dogs are, we want to look after the dogs?
It was considered, Dave. I mean, what we considered was, was it better to give it to the dogs, to the trainers rather, or was it better to give it to the owners? I mean, the board, when we kicked it around, and we did for some considerable time, said, look, this is a emergency welfare payment. This is for the dogs. We hoped, and we're blessed with the fact that the owners continue to make payments to their trainers and their dogs. So this was really about us trying to contribute towards the food and bedding. So yeah, we did consider it, but on the basis that if it goes direct to the trainers, we hope that it would go onto food and bedding. That's what actually happened.
Absolutely, and Matt, a lot of people have been deserving of praise to get the show back on the road, haven't they?
Yeah, I think it's something not everyone realises, just how many pieces of the jigsaw there are to get greyhound racing back on the road again. Every track has a lot of unsung heroes. The track staff have worked tirelessly to make sure that the surface is prepared. So you're absolutely right. We've got to make sure that we're very thankful for all these people. But let's go back to the elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about my added lockdown weight. The working group. There was a lot of consternation about it on social media, as there always is. Any decision gets pulled apart with different opinions. I think the main issue with it from a lot of people's point of view was the fact that there was no trainer or owner input, or it didn't feel like there was any owner or trainer input. I mean, was it something you were aware of?
Oh, we were aware of it because we monitor social media, Matt. I mean, it's one of those things that we looked at, but it's one of those things that, in my experience, you want, and this is in no way is it derogatory towards owners or trainers or anybody else for that matter, but we wanted people that understood about the choreography at a stadium, as in terms of how does it work, and also in terms of feet on the ground, what will that look like. So it wasn't to put anybody's noses out, but we picked on two promoters who run tracks and, as I said, stipendiary steward. But what we also did, as and when we required things like veterinary advice or trainer's advice, we either did one of two things. We either got the veterinary director or other veterinary surgeons on the phone and spoke to them directly, or we sent our stipendiary stewards out to get on to trainers and float things by them. So yeah, I can understand owners weren't consulted on this, other than through the owner's representative who's on the Greyhound board. But that was at a time we were actually presenting to them rather than developing the actual piece. But all I'll ask is, and I know there's some criticism there and some of them justifiable, but this was about trying to as I said, really choreograph a bit of a dance routine at the track. No more, no less than that. And the bigger the committee, in my experience, the more problematic that becomes. But yeah, look, I've said on other forums on this, we live and learn, and certainly one of the things that has come up for is that there needs to be better consultation going forward. And I get that.
It's something, if God forbid something like this ever happened again, it's perhaps something you would do differently.
And I think we need to be mindful of that. I mean, the government haven't ruled out, as of most people, in terms of fear, is the fact that we could get a second spike on this, and it could, all roll back. I mean, the thing that hung in my mind for a long time was the fact that the government said, hopefully things can go ahead on the 1st of June. Well, here we are with less than 12 hours to go before, we're close to racing again. But you've all seen in the press what's happening with the public. I think most people are frustrated with being locked down and wanting to go and do things. And I understand that. There's lots of owners, and we were trying and want to come and see their dogs. But this is what it says on the tin. This is racing behind closed doors. This isn't about having small audiences. This is about people who are necessary to deliver the racing, or were necessary to deliver the trialling. And all I'd ask, certainly of owners, is just, you've been incredibly patient all the way through this. You've supported your trainers, you've supported your dogs. We just need you to be a little bit more patient until such time as the government can turn around and say, you've got free access again. And in the meantime, it's now being broadcast. So one would hope that you can see your dogs racing on the TV or in bookmakers.
Well, speaking of the tracks, we've had 2 weeks of trialing now. What kind of feedback have you had back from the tracks?
Someone asked me, going back to this, Matt, whether or not I was anxious when we started it, and I'd be a liar if I said I wasn't. And that's because you've got component parts here, both from the track, from trainers, from kennel hands, and trying to feed that all into. I mean, I've got 2 left feet, so if someone told me to turn right and turn left, I have no idea where I was going. So I've had my fair share of sleepless nights over these last 10 weeks, but I didn't need to, because actually, I think from the feedback that I got through Paul Illingworth and the stipendiary stewards, who were the ones who were really feeding back, was that people listened, that they did as they were told. I know that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, being told what to do, but they did, and they realised that what they wanted to do was to get dogs trialling back, and ultimately from tomorrow get them racing again. So actually, full credit to everybody who was involved in those situations. And don't forget, we went to every single track that was trialling, and will be at every single track that will be racing as well, to make sure that was being done. And even as I said, we unfurloughed our sampling stewards a couple of weeks ago, and that wasn't so we could start jumping back into sampling dogs and things like that, although that is a necessary part of the game. But it was really, as I said, to help the tracks, to help the trainers to get into that position where, come tomorrow when it's being filmed, everybody understands what it is they're doing. There will be slip-ups, that's human error, but the whole point of this is trying to do the absolute level best to make sure that we're not putting anyone on offer, and that includes obviously trainers and kennel hands, it includes stadium staff, and ultimately includes the dogs.
Is that why trials weren't allowed to be filmed or streamed? Because you mentioned obviously owners wanted to watch their dogs, but was it just to be on the safe side, make sure everyone does know what they're doing in preparation for the start of racing?
I'm sure there'll be enough people out there, Dave, to know that they will have trawled through all the government advice. And there was a specific bit in there which said that you are unable to broadcast anything relating to sport up until the 1st of June. So for us, and the way that we got around it with the government was 2 weeks before the 1st of June, which if I remember right, it was the 18th of May.
Yeah, that's when they started, yeah.
Work is, for the majority of people involved in the sport, work is at the stadium. Yeah, there's an awful lot of work that carries on at the kennels, we get that. But in terms of the cell for DCMS, work actually takes place at the stadium. And for us to do that, people need to go there. But we were cognizant of the fact that it said that you will not broadcast anything up until the 1st of June. So it wasn't us trying to throw our weight around. It was just merely trying to say, look, if we can demonstrate to government that we can do this, then there's every chance we can do it. And we're one of the few sports that have done that. Football's done a little bit of pre-training as well. But certainly, we are one of the few sports that have been looked at even in that lockdown period.
What examples of sort of what procedures have we got in place to protect people at the track, the kennel staff, the track staff, etc.? You guide us through these?
No, well, I mean, everything from start to finish, right from when the trainers turn up in their cars or their vans, if they've got the dogs on board, and how they're marshalled into the car park in terms of which trainers and what dogs and kennel hands are coming forward with their dogs at any one time, all the way through to the vets inspections and what that looks like. We've had to speak to the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons because, again, people won't realise this. Even a week ago, Matt, we had concerns of whether or not the college would actually deem greyhound racing as an essential part of what veterinary surgeons are doing. Over a period of time, they've been allowed to do more and more, but that's around emergency treatments. And I think most of us would agree that greyhound racing isn't an emergency treatment unless a dog becomes injured. So we've had to jump, if you'll excuse the expression, a number of hurdles to get to where we are now. But even the vets, I'm glad to say, have been biting to get back to work. But again, it's about making sure that they're protected. So again, the issue of BPE, that was another consideration of the operational working group was, are we going to be saying that everyone's got to be wearing PPE at a time when the NHS were really struggling to get their PPE back themselves? So all those sorts of things were in the mix. Practically, I suppose some of the things that I'll talk about was how do you load the traps? So especially tomorrow, when we've got 6 dogs going into the traps, bear in mind we're supposed to be observing the 2-metre rule. So it's a question of how you would load those traps. And you talked about the elephant in the room a little while ago. The big elephant in the room is what's going to happen at the pickup. Yeah. What does that look like? And it's another part where we've lost sleep over it because we know that, ordinarily, away from COVID-19, if dogs started to fight or a kennel handler or trainer was down at the pickup and a dog started to get into trouble, they would take the dog and they'd pass it back to the trainer. That's part of the collaboration that trainers do. Will that happen tomorrow? In all honesty, hand on heart, yeah, most likely. But we have to take as many reasonable steps as we can to make sure that as much as possible, it can be controlled. And there's a number of different people out there, probably everyone actually who's into greyhound racing has got an opinion on it. But we've looked at it. Some tracks are gonna have the people who are going to be picking up the dogs in PPE, others aren't, and they're going to rely on experience, and so they're going to have a very experienced track member there to try and oversee the pickup. But the one thing I keep pointing out about the operational plan to people is it's continually reviewed. So if we find, as we have done the last 2 weeks, that things need to be refined or changed, then we'll do it. And that's no different going forward with racing. There will be a lot of people out there who aren't necessarily into greyhound racing, who, even when we were racing behind closed doors, I made a big thing about, I had 345 emails from people who are opposed to greyhound racing, who were watching the pickup and saying that we were, it was nothing to do with animal welfare anymore. It was suddenly to do with the fact that we were going to be spreading COVID-19 amongst our trainers, stadia staff and kennel hands. So it's not about trying to tick the box, it's about trying to apply a bit of common sense to something that ordinarily happens when we're normally racing. But we need to try and do that and choreograph that when we've got certain restrictions still applying to us. So over the next 2 weeks, up to phase 3, you may see things change again.
It's certainly going to be fascinating to watch it. Of course, it's not a cash-rich sport. There's a lot of people in the industry, in kennels, as well as some of the trainers themselves, living hand to mouth, relying on run money and prize money. I mean, how important is the resumption of racing to the well-being of the industry?
Again, we've solved this on, COVID-19 is a human crisis. We all know that. But what we've been selling to government is, first and foremost, for us, is a big welfare issue. Dogs being on their beds, being worked on by training staff. Yeah, it's great, and it's brilliant to see that in the time that we've been static for 10 weeks, trainers have been getting on top of their routines, getting on top of sorting their kennels out if they can afford to do so. But as you pointed out, it's very much a hand to mouth. So for us, it was about the imperative being the fact that this is an obvious human factor here, but it's also about the animal welfare one as well. It's remiss of me to say that it has shone up a few things that we didn't anticipate, or that we've been talking about for many years, and that's around some of the trainers who rely on things like prize money rather than being involved with kennel bills with their trainers, or with their owners rather. That's been very tough for those trainers. And again, the starts have been monitoring those trainers that have had agreements with that. And one of the things we looked at, and we've been looking at for a while, but didn't happen prior to getting into lockdown, is having contracts between owners and trainers. Even before this happened, we would get probably 2-3 times a month trainers phoning up to say that owners had abandoned them, or they owed large kennel bills, or that they hadn't paid prize money. So it has sort of polarized it a bit in terms of what we're now starting to see. And so from our point of view, one would hope that there are some opportunities coming out from lockdown that we can start to speak to trainers to try to get them to negotiate new contracts with owners, and contracts that are binding as well, because I think that's the other thing. Verbals don't necessarily translate into actuals when it comes to those sorts of things. But I think, people have endured. They may have found it hard, but the trainers and owners supporting each other have got through this. And even the next few weeks are going to be tough, because trainers are going to be out there running their dogs. There isn't going to be the straightforward running of money. And so that's going to take a little time to come through as well. And same for the tracks, until such time as the bookmakers start receiving their funds into their digital service rather than their online, their retail, which we hope will happen on the 15th of June. There's still going to be this period of time when there's people having to pay for diesel, pay for food and all the rest of it, without there necessarily being the money coming in.
Yeah, as you say, it's an issue, isn't it, in the sport there, Dave?
Yeah, well,
Really.
In almost a seamless link there, Mark. I want to talk money because, as you just mentioned there, very best case scenario, we are 2 weeks away from the reopening of some betting shops, almost certain to not be all, and in fact, perhaps some shops won't reopen at all. Obviously, the funding mechanisms behind greyhound racing revolve around the racing being on and people placing bets on the racing, and then contributions are made, 0.6% of turnover. There's obviously going to be a big hole there. First of all, what's the breakdown in fund contributions, retail versus online? Because for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be running solely on online turnover, aren't we?
Yeah, and let's not forget, we only got the online payments from January 19, so they've only been going 18 months or so. And what we've seen is, on historic data, that the retail probably represents about 60% and the online about 40%. Now, it's probably too early to say, but even before lockdown, when we went to racing behind closed doors, obviously all the retail fell away, but we certainly had the online, and there is that possibility you will get the bounce. People who are punters that don't even necessarily follow greyhound racing, and that's on top of the people who do follow greyhound racing, will see the dogs out there tomorrow, and they'll realise. Let's be frank, there's great margins on dog racing, more so than many other sports. Great integrity, good welfare standards as well. So I mean, on that basis, that we may see a bounce on the retail, on the line. Sorry.
I think the figure that was bounding around pre-lockdown was, from some bookmakers, was an incredible 600% jump in turnover online, which is remarkable, really, isn't it?
It is, but who's to say that some of those punters who haven't necessarily previously bet on greyhound racing won't come back? I mean, we've been trying to be. I saw something online today saying Hobbsy did his piece tomorrow, and Hobbsy's done really well in time to promote it. But we've been pushing very, very hard with the bookmaker companies to say that greyhound racing's back. I mean, I don't know the last time that either of you went into a bookmakers, but there's very little coverage in terms of promoting greyhound racing. So there's a real opportunity here. And as I keep saying, as I have done to the new Betting and Gaming Council, and forgive me for saying it, because it's getting a bit blasé now, but we were the last show in town, and we're going to be the first back, and with a great product. It was a really sound product that at the end of the day, bookmakers get a very good return on. And so on that basis, yes, it has made a big dent in everybody's pockets, and that includes the bookmakers. We can't deny them that. But I think we're coming back I personally really want to see some opportunities about how we can take that forward with bookmakers.
I mean, as a betting product, greyhound racing is, as you say, in shops, been almost something to just fill the gaps and something that just goes on in the background that's always happening. We kind of really need to be moving away from that, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And do you know what? For the life of me, I don't know why that has been the case, because I think, greyhound racing has been the constant in the UK. Other markets have come and gone, and we've seen the emergence of new markets as well. But realistically, greyhound racing has always had good margins on it, and I think it's a terrible shame that the bookmakers especially haven't seen the merit in that. But as I said, we are going to do our level best to be pumping greyhound racing certainly over the next 2 weeks, whilst we're competing with lesser sports that are out there, including football.
Brilliant, absolutely. Right, okay. Moving on a little bit, you had previously mentioned that the GBGB had been siphoning from the budget to fund the Greyhound retirement bond, which you mentioned a little bit earlier on. As you mentioned, though, the reserves have been a little bit depleted, not a little bit, a lot depleted from the emergency welfare payments. Are you going to be in any sort of position to still be able to roll out that scheme?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, we're constantly looking at our finances, but I think the position we'll be at is the retirement scheme as was would have included dogs that are coming up to retirement. So if an owner, we obviously haven't done the publicity around this fully yet, but if an owner wanted to take part in the scheme, they could put £200 into the bond. We'd top that up as well. And so that's £400 that could go with the dog to some rehoming centre that would obviously try and find the dog its forever home. Now, I'm not sure that can take place at this time, but one of the things that we might be saying is that certainly there's enough money there to start looking at the newly registered dogs that are coming in. Because again, a dog's retirement isn't set in stone. It isn't 4 years or 5 years. It could be as little as the second race, even if something catastrophic was to go wrong in terms of injury. So I think we can still look at that. I mean, the other thing to talk about, Dave, is also that we had this obligation, I've touched on already, about the kennel improvements with the BSI. We set a large sum of money across to, in its first year, trying to help trainers out with assistance funding around improvements to kennels. We had bought in a third party, an SF, who were going to carry out those inspections. And I can almost guarantee that there would have been a lot of money had to be invested, not only by trainers, but also by the Greyhound Board in trying to get kennel standards to a situation where the government would be happy. Now, we may need to set that back a little bit, but I think it's, again, there's no turning back from any of this. We've made the decision, both on the retirement scheme and kennel improvements, that we need to do it, and we will do it. It's just a question of whether or not we can do that in 2020, realistically.
Okay, and I don't want to dwell on that too much because we've still got a lot to get through. But you mentioned there that the bond itself would be optional, and it would be an owner paying £200 and yourselves paying £200. Was there ever a discussion had about any funds coming from anywhere else, from tracks, from bookmakers, from media rights holders, anyone else to put money in the pot, or is it just going to be owners and the GBGB?
Well, part of the money from the GBGB would come from tracks anyway. So, as you know, that every time a race is run, there's a special licence fee that's applied. The tracks were consulted with and said that they would pay part of that special licence fee would go to the retirement scheme as well. I mean, in terms of the media providers, no, and they're under no obligation to do that. Bookmakers, again, we haven't spoken to them about it, but again, perhaps we'll come on to that a little bit later on around the Greyhound Trust. There are other options where we could look to get more money out from the bookmakers on that as well. So this was the start of a journey, trying to say, look, as an industry, we take greyhound ownership very seriously, the responsibility that goes with that as well. And that's to say that at the point a dog is registered with the Greyhound Board, there is a financial bond that will follow that through. There's a number of people, this is not my idea, it's never been my idea. There's a lot of people in the sport that have been around an awful lot longer who have said that this is a good way of trying to get, or to ensure, sorry, that at the end of a dog's racing career, that there is some financial contribution made to the dog
Absolutely.
in retirement.
I think it's a fantastic idea. We're looking out for that. Right, you just touched on it then, Mark. Obviously, in recent months, there has been a breakdown in the relationship with the Greyhound Trust. Can you explain what happened there, and tell us what you feel would be the best possible outcome, the perfect resolution? Because at the end of the day, everybody just wants the very best for the dogs. That's the whole purpose of the Greyhound Trust. The dogs are looked after before racing, during their racing life, and everybody wants them to be looked after as best as possible after their racing.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing here, Dave, is that it's all about the dog, and making sure that money that we pay, what we paid to the Greyhound Trust was used in the best possible way to make sure that it gave those dogs the best opportunity to get them into someone's home. So, the Greyhound Trust was formed in 1975. It was formed by people that have been involved with dog racing for a long time. So it was an industry limb, if you like. And sadly, as we know, Liz died a couple of weeks ago, who was one of the founder members of that. Now, the charity has got to the stage where they're obviously down in Surrey. Now they've moved out of London. They're building their head office. We got to lockdown, and we, in the same way that you've probed me about what our cash reserves are, we wanted to know from the trust what their cash reserves were as well. Because the moment we went into lockdown, apart from some residual money coming in from the bookmakers, the tap was off. That's it. There's no money coming in again until we start racing. So on that pretense, we spoke with the Greyhound Trust and wanted to know what the cash reserves were. We didn't get straight answers. When we did, it caused us a lot of concern as to their viability moving forward. And over a period of at least 2 or 3 weeks, we asked further questions. On some we got answers, on some things we didn't. And it got to the stage, in all honesty, where we as the Greyhound board said, look, we've lost trust and confidence with the senior team there. And unless things change, as the major sponsor, we can't be paying you, well, we can't pay you the money that we used to. I mean, don't forget that was 1.3 million a year, which worked out at £108,000 per month, which is an awful lot of money. And we're at a stage now where we can't continue to pay that £108,000 because we don't have it. We're paying our trainers, as we know, 50 pence per dog per day. And as a contribution, that's what we want to pay to the trust. And we were basically told in uncertain terms that the trust would go belly up within 2 to 3 months if that was going to be the case. And we as the industry weren't necessarily standing by them, which, again, to reiterate, we kept saying, look, we absolutely want to stand by the fact that you've got ex-racing greyhounds in your kennels spread across the country, and we want to make sure that they're looked after. But we were struggling to know how we could do that when we weren't getting the answers around what their cash flow looked like. And it ended up with the fact that we broke ties with them. We have continued to pay the trust an amount of money, not the amount we were paying, but an amount of money based on the 50 pence per dog per day. Where we are now, you talk about perfect solution. I don't think there is one, in all honesty, other than the fact that what we're trying to do is do the right thing by the dogs. I've been speaking to a few kennels in terms of what it is that they think the GBGB can do on their behalf. We've not ruled out the fact that the CEO and the chairman may step down, although I think that's unlikely because they've had the full support of their board of trustees. We've looked at options about if they were to go into administration, about where the Greyhound board would sit on that and whether we would go and try and rescue it. And I think we would. And the alternative is obviously that we look at a plan B and potentially go and start a new charity, help on that and move things forward. But it's got to be what the branches want, realistically. And that's why we're in having some conversations with them. But do you know what? Again, they've been very grateful that they've had their own concerns over a long period of time of what's happening at the trust. So none of this is new. And as I said, it's quite sensitive, if I'm honest. But at the end of the day, this isn't about personalities. This isn't about fit. This is about making sure that we absolutely look after the dogs after their running career and get into homes.
So the crux of it is that if needs must, you would be prepared to A, bail out the Greyhound Trust, and B, sort of perhaps alternatively, is almost divert funds away from there and go it alone in such the retired greyhounds then become almost the responsibility of the GBGB on a charity sense as well.
Well, there is that. You could word it like that, although obviously any charity that we would set up, this goes back to maybe the bookmakers could come in and assist with this financially for a capital spent on a startup, although obviously we haven't spoken to them about it at this stage. But it is about saying, look, we're not going to leave the dogs. Yeah, that's the last thing we want to do. And even though we've got limited amounts of cash now, we want to be doing the right thing, not seen to be doing, but actually doing the right thing. So, we will continue making payments. But this is also about what the trust want to do themselves. I'm talking about the kennels, because some of them have a big affiliation with the Greyhound Trust. And again, away from personalities, this is, they feel that it generally is a brand, stands for something. And we totally understand that. And so it may well be that if we do go a different way, that perhaps the Greyhound Trust will continue on its own path, and we'll have our own charity that's set up, which will be independent of the GBGB, but we'll have support around that can get dogs into homes as well. I mean, the Greyhound Trust, on average, we're homing 3,500 dogs per year. As you probably know, there are almost twice that exit the sport every year. So there are other independent kennels out there that also find dogs homes. And that's part of what the retirement scheme was all about, was to open up new avenues to get dogs into homes. And sooner or later, even the Greyhound Trust wouldn't have been getting the same amount of money. They'd be getting it on the basis that each dog they took in would get £400 bond with it as well.
Okay, well, let's hope that some form of resolution can be made there, in which ultimately the best is for the dogs. Well,
Dave, sorry, I'm confident it will be, because as I said, this is about the dogs. This isn't about personalities or
absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Right, well, not to prevent lifting the mood further, but obviously, Matt, we are 3 tracks lighter than we were pre-lockdown, with racing resuming tomorrow, sadly.
Yes, while it's phenomenal, great for us that the racing is back tomorrow, the doors are going to remain locked at Peterborough, Poole and Shawfield. And Mark, have we got any updates from these tracks, how they are, what their plans are?
Okay, well, yes, very sadly, one of the challenges of COVID-19 was obviously with Peterborough closing. I mean, there were issues before when we were racing behind closed doors, that again, it didn't suit their business model. They did rely on footfall, and from people that I've spoken to before they shut down, and I've spoken to a lot since, I suppose they're in some ways even more dismayed by the fact that they have closed, because they knew what the footfall was like. If you go there on a Friday or Saturday, they had really good numbers there at the racing, and it was a great track. So we wait to see whether or not anyone's going to ride to the rescue of Toaster. There's been a couple of snippets where people may well be, but again, until such time as we get a formal approach on that, and we generally don't know what the track themselves are going to do, what plans they may have, despite being asked on that. So we wait to see, but it will be a crying shame if Peterborough weren't to Phoenix in perhaps the same way that Toaster have in the last couple of weeks as well. It would be a really sad loss for the sport for Peterborough to go. And I know some of the trainers there have managed to secure places at other tracks, which is understandable. There are quite a few trainers there that are quite elderly. So again, we threw our stipendiary steward into wanting to know what they were going to do around each of the trainers I'm talking about, in terms of what their intentions were. So we are going to lose a few trainers, I think, but that's probably based more on age than ambition. And some of the other trainers are already starting to move on. In respect of Shawfield, that's an easy one. Shawfield, again, has never had a media contract. Paul will come to. And Peterborough only had one fixture per week. But Shawfield never have. And for that reason, other than the Scottish Derby, so for that reason, they will keep their doors shut. But we've spoken to the management there. They have every ambition of coming back. They continue to pay their trainers while they're off as well. So as soon as the Scottish Parliament relaxed restrictions, and have started to do that this weekend, we'll be a situation where Shawfield will spring back up again. And then finally, Poole. A lot of people were saying, well, why didn't ARC give Poole a fixture? Well, they obviously Poole's linked to Swindon, and they gave. My understanding is that they looked at both of those tracks and gave them fixtures, but it was the track's decision to take the fixture from Poole and move it to Swindon. Again, they've released the trainers at Poole from their contracts, and also suggested to them that those that can should go to Swindon and get trials there and get races there. So
that was a decision made by Stadia UK, Mark. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
the fixtures were.
That's not our decision, or ARC's decision for that matter. There was a negotiation between ARC and them, and so Stadia UK made the decision that they wanted to move their fixture to Swindon. And as I said, that they, from what I can gather, they want their trainers to go there as well if they can.
Lovely, thank you very much. You mentioned, of course, Toaster there, rising like a phoenix from the ashes. I mean, there are lots of people that are owed money by the previous Toaster project, should we call it? So not everyone is entirely thrilled, but from your point of view, how do you feel personally about Toaster being back in operation?
I think it's great. I think Kevin Boothby's worked really hard to make it a goer. He's put a lot of his own investment into the track in terms of narrowing it down so that it's from 8 to 6 dog racing, and he sees it beyond perhaps the previous owners in terms of what it can do for them. I mean, we all know that those of us who have been there, it's a great site, huge, brilliant vista, and Kevin's got plans for it, part of which is greyhound racing, clearly. So the fact that it's come back online, I think, is a testament to Kevin and his team, but also the fact that there's, and I get your point, Matt, about people being owed money, but there's a lot of people who are rejoicing in the fact that it's opened up again. From the point of view of people who's owed money, excuse me, Kevin's got no liability on that. That goes back to the previous owners, and that includes the Greyhound board. We were owed £160,000 in special licence fees. So what I would say to those people who are still owed money is that the creditors are still out there, and they're still working through with the administrators in terms of what, if any, money people can get back. And so, just because it's gone very quiet, and now because it's leased and run by Kevin Boothby, it doesn't mean to say that money still won't flow back.
How smooth was the process of reopening Toaster from your position as a regulator?
If you took COVID-19 out of it, in so much as people were locked down and can't move around, incredibly easy. As I said, it was. I went up there on one occasion prior to lockdown, and Kevin was doing a lot of work in terms of getting the running surface right. We know from when Toaster was open previously, there were issues around. It's an elevated track. It's on a very elevated position. There always seems to be a wind there whenever you go. And despite the fact that it had, probably the drainage was probably too good, if in all honesty, the track would dry out quite quickly. So Kevin has tried very hard to try and remedy all of that. And as I said, narrowing down from the 8 down to 6, hopefully will have an impact as well. So from the point of view of the track, I mean, it had the infrastructure there. Kevin's brought in a new team. They're an experienced team as well. So it was very much just making sure that whatever had been done in terms of renovating the area and getting the track up to speed was what he needed to do. The rest of it was, as I said, very much plain sailing. We had great support from them, and hopefully we gave them good support as well. So I can't ask for better than that, realistically.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's something that we would love to support as an industry and make it back into the marquee track for the sport. Kevin Boothby, we spoke to him a few weeks ago on Trap to Line. He's full of ideas. How can the GBGB support his ideas and his vision for this track?
Well, it depends what element you're talking about. I mean, a lot of Kevin's ambitions are nothing to do with dog racing. He's looking at it as a wedding venue and beer festival and the rest of it. But in terms of the sport itself, I mean, I think if you know Kevin, as I'm sure you do, he's very big into the idea of using it as a very big open racing centre as well, which I think would, given its location, given what it looks like as well, I think it would be absolutely ideal. As always, he's got to pour the money in terms of sponsorship around that and fitting around the open race schedule. But I fully applaud what he's trying to do there. I think the fact he's diversified on a lot of stuff is something that perhaps other tracks could look at as well.
It has the potential to be incredibly exciting. But of course, we've got a little way to go yet before we can get back to something resembling normality, Dave.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same with, here we are racing tomorrow, but in terms of the horizon, people are asking what's happening about open racing. So, there is that walk before you can run. I get that, but I also know the frustrations from owners around the fact that they've had dogs sat on their beds for an awful long time, and even now they're not, all of them aren't being able to get out there. So it goes back to what I said earlier about it, just admiring the fact that people have been patient and being patient a little bit longer if they can.
Okay, I just want to lift a quote from the operational policy, Mark, which there will be no open racing during these phases of behind closed doors racing to minimise movement of people between locations. This decision will remain continually under review. I just wanted to ask who will ultimately make that decision when open racing starts up?
So sometime during the week of beginning the 7th of June, the Open Racing Committee will meet, they'll convene, and they will go through first of all of those classics and Cat 1s and competitions that we should have had, while we're in lockdown, and whether or not any of those can be salvaged. And they'll also look forward, I mean, we'll come onto the Derby at some stage, I'm sure, but look forward to what other open races we can look at as well for the remainder of the schedule for this year. Now, some of that is almost like filling your way around in the dark, because we don't know how many sponsors are going to turn around and say, yeah, do you know what, it's okay to race behind closed doors and to run this competition, and we'll fund it to the levels that we are. Most people for open racing want to be there, they want to see it in the way that it should be, and that's no different to the Derby as well. So I think we are already looking at it, but we'll look at it formally from the week beginning the 7th of June, and then we'll hopefully have something to say going forward. But it's going to be with trepidation, if I'm honest, Dave, because it's just trying to work out whether or not sponsors are going to want to run these competitions behind closed doors. I'm hopeful that some will.
Is that a conversation, obviously, for tracks and proposed sponsors, or will you be involved in that?
If the proposed sponsors want to talk to us on any level, then clearly the door is always open. But it's very much for the tracks to be talking to their sponsors to find out, where they want to go with that, and that includes obviously the bookmaker tracks as well. But whether or not they're looking to invest in those races. But look, we all know that at the end of the day, that open racing is the premier aspect of dog racing. The graded perhaps will pay some of the bills, but not all of them. So open racing is very important. But I go back to we've got to walk before we can run.
Can I just ask, if you can, reveal who's on that open race committee, and will there be conversations with the top trainers and owners, i.e. the people who will be running in the proposed competitions?
Well, I can tell you, it's no secret he's on the working group. So it's Rachel Corden, Ian Smythe, and obviously Paul Illingworth is a senior stipe. So the other two promoters, obviously, one's obviously got the GVC tracks and the other one's got the ARC tracks. Their job is effectively done. Their plan was to get the operational plan out, and they've done that, as I said, and I think they've done it with I think they've done an excellent job in trying to get this out. And it's obviously the proof of the pudding is the fact that certainly on the trialling it's worked. So there's been no secret in that. But in terms of then moving forward, it's really down to the racing committee via the regulatory board as to saying as and when open racing will come back. But we also need to gauge what the appetite for that is, in all honesty. Yeah, the owners would have it tomorrow, I've no doubt of that. But it's also about whether or not the tracks themselves and also the sponsors are willing to fund those races.
Okay, and obviously the IGB were first out the traps, as it were, with their proposed schedule. They've mapped out almost the rest of the year with all their classics. Obviously they've got government backing, but is that something that you want to do as soon as possible as well? This is what we plan to do as well. Will there be conversations with the IGB, so perhaps we don't see any clashes? How will that work?
Well, we do talk to the IGB, but in all honesty, the one that's going to trouble us is going to be the Irish Derby. Obviously, that kicks off in August and then runs through to the end of September. So we need to look at that. I mean, I know some people are saying that obviously the Irish send a very big contingent over to the English Derby, or our Derby, I should say. And it's one of those things that, is that going to conflict? We still don't know what restrictions is going to be on the movement of animals, i.e. dogs, from Ireland over into this country and back again. I mean, here we are. Not so long ago, the thing that was testing me was about Brexit and about the free movement of animals, which I think we probably bottomed out at the end of it with DEFRA. But it's going to be the same whilst there's some restrictions that are still in play between Ireland and the UK. So there's that aspect to it. And again, you need to remember that we want to try and get our new schedule out as soon as we can. But even some of the sponsors are in very difficult commercial places at the moment because of how it's affected, the lockdown has affected them as much as anybody else, and that includes dog racing. So we will endeavour to get out some form of schedule as soon as we can.
Okay, well, we might as well strike while the iron's hot then, Matt, and move on to the Greyhound Derby, because that is the pinnacle of the sport.
Yeah, unquestionably, the whole of the calendar really revolves around the Derby. So the most important question, I guess, and it's not one you're really going to be able to answer, but we have to ask it: will we be having a Derby in 2020?
I'd like to think we are, Matt. I really do, but that's my opinion. It's not necessarily the opinion of Nottingham that's got the Derby at the moment. I mean, my belief is that they will be speaking to their sponsors, and they've got 3. They'll want to make sure that the sponsors are aware that it could be held behind closed doors. And I think whilst running it's one thing, not having the atmosphere is another. But again, we don't know until such time as Nottingham feed back to ourselves as to what the situation is with the sponsors. Will we know? I mean, I've been asked questions like, well, if Nottingham aren't willing to host it, what will the Greyhound Board do there? And obviously Nottingham have got it for the time being, certainly for the next year. But again, I'd have to take that under advisance from the regulatory board as to what they want to do. But I am confident that Nottingham will want to host it through ARC. It's just a question of really speaking to their sponsors and trying to find out when it's, well, first of all, that they are willing to hold it, but also the dates as well. And I've just looked, the Irish Derby starts with its qualifiers on the 14th of August and finishes on the 19th of September. I've already gone out on a limb and said that I'm pretty sure we wouldn't want to run the English Derby in November and December. So it's quite tight. It's quite tight, if I'm honest, but I think it's doable as well. Depending on the situation between moving animals between Ireland and the UK, we'll have to look at what non-essential travel looks like when we know what the dates are being banded around.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big concerns, because the Irish runners and the Irish in general have such a huge role to play with the Derby.
Yeah, I agree.
Is it possible to squeeze it in October, do you think?
Well, anything's possible if we put our minds to it. It's really about, as I said, Nottingham speaking to the sponsors and finding what they'll do, and then trying to work around the rest of the open race schedule. I mean, I think as I said, it's doable. It's just a question of trying to get those dates nailed down as soon as possible.
And have you liaised with Nottingham or Ben Keith, the other sponsors, at all yet?
Well, we're back to what's the Greyhound Board's role and what isn't. That's not our role to do that, but we will be pushing ARC fairly soon to say, can we get some direction as to what you're going to be doing coming out from this? I mean, as I said, we're back racing tomorrow. It follows on that the Open Race Committee will meet sometime during the week of the 7th. So one would hope that in the next 2 to 3 weeks we get an answer, a definite answer.
We got an interesting question through regarding the lost time in racing. Would the GBGB consider exploring the time lost racing with pups? Now, of course, as of tomorrow, June 18 whelps are no longer pups.
Yeah.
So there's been a few months lost there. And of course, we don't have open racing yet. is there any kind of a plan, perhaps with youngsters tackling all age company with less experience, that we can change the program up a little bit, perhaps encourage winners of one, winners of two, to help young dogs adapt?
Well, we go back to anything's possible. I can't give my view on it because I think that's one, again, for the racing committee to look at and make a consideration on. But look, we've been through unprecedented times, so that probably qualifies for the fact that we have to think fairly flexibly as well. So again, hopefully in the next couple of weeks you'll get an answer on that.
All right, well, Dave, let's dig a little deeper into the role of the GBGB.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of questions from owners, and so often, Mark, I hear coming from your mouth and everyone at the GBGB, in that, you know, the role of the GBGB ultimately is as the regulator of the sport, and there are often frustrations from everyone in the sport that things are not done. There's not marketing, commercial arms of whatever. Before I ask you the questions, I want to give you the opportunity to just explain what the role of the GBGB is, and who is actually involved in the GBGB, who sits on the board, who makes the decisions of the Greyhound Board of Great Britain.
Okay, so yes, we do regulate. We work to the rules of racing. Yes, we license and we inspect, which is everything you think of from a self-regulatory body. We are the only sport that are UCAS accredited, which is, again, a really good thing to have. And we're looking to extend that. Even now, we're looking to extend that. We're overseen by an impartiality committee who are not necessarily stakeholders, but they're third parties and they're independent, that make sure that we are abiding by everything that UCAS requires to do. But going back to your marketing and promotion and things, yeah, that's been something that I've wrangled with for certainly the time that I've been the managing director. Because when I still remember when I first started and went to every single track, and you go through certain tracks and there's huge empty rooms, and when you turn around and say, well, what used to inhabit here, invariably they came back and said it was our marketing or promotions team, because all the tracks used to have their own responsibility for doing that, and it wasn't coming from either the GBGB or the NGRC. So one of the questions when I took over and spoke to the board was very much that, really. It was just, what are we? Are we just a regulator, or are we there to promote the sport and market the sport? And, you know, in well, it'll be 3 years later this year, it's one of those things that it's slowly come into focus in terms of what we should be. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to recruit an executive commercial director. Now, in the 5 years I've been here, come July, there used to be a non-executive commercial director that used to sit on the board. Very sadly, he passed away. We've tried getting we interviewed 2 directors a couple of years ago to try and get one of them on there, but neither one of them were exactly what we were after. And it was a case of early this year, me putting to the board that we recruit someone who's a full-time director, a GBGB employee, that would have all the commercial acumen that we'd required, and for them to actually start building up a commercial strategy, and around that, such things as promotion, around that, such things as bringing in sponsorship into the sport. Because at the moment, I keep talking about sponsorship either comes from one of 2 main sources. One is either the bookmakers, or the second one is by wealthy owners or philanthropists. We every time I think the sport's trying to get hold of the same sort of sponsors that you have in horse racing or other big sports, they have tended to get targeted by the antis, and then they move away. So what you need really, as I keep saying, is, and again, perhaps we can touch this later, is to sort the welfare argument out first. But you also need someone who's got a far better commercial brain than I've got. And so that's why we're trying to turn that around to make sure that we have a board director that understands commerce and understands marketing and sponsorship.
So sorry, where are you on appointing that
Well,
director?
going into COVID, we got down to a short list. And so realistically, now we're now in the same way that we're using Zoom, and there's other things out there as well. We will have to, even though it's not ideal, we'll have to interview via that. But I'm confident that we'll get the right person who'll have a good understanding of the sport and can take us forward.
Okay, right. The question from an owner I received was, I accept the role of the GBGB is that of the regulator of greyhound racing, but do you accept that without developing the commerciality and viability of the industry, you may well end up with nothing to regulate? Does the GBGB hold some responsibility for ensuring the continuation of the sport?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. If we don't change, we don't adapt, then we are going to be basically just regulating ourselves out of a sport. So that goes back to what I said about we need to develop a commercial strategy. It needs to be about promoting greyhound racing, and it also needs to be about making sure that we've got sponsorship deals out there, which is something that we haven't been good at in the past, if ever. But it is something that we have to push on, because if we don't, I think we can no longer rely on the tracks to do it. Some of the tracks do a very good job at trying to develop things like that, but I think it's time for us to, in the same way that horse racing's done it, is look at a separate limb that looks at just the commercials on it.
Okay, and the same owner then followed up with, would the GBGB welcome owners willing to invest their time free of charge to help improve the sport for all? There may well be owners out there with useful commercial skills, perhaps not possessed by those within the GBGB. Could a committee be set up to run the commercial aspect of the sport?
Well, first of all, I always like something that's free. So if anyone wants to give up their time, they're more than welcome. But if I take you back to when Paul Efferson was sat as the owner's rep, some people will remember that he sat on an innovations panel, which is a group of like-minded, skilled owners, done very well in terms of whatever they did for a living. And they came up with different ideas. And the one that they were working on was syndication. Getting more syndicates out there owning more greyhounds. I think something like that. I mean, the Greyhound Board's already got its committee structure set up, and that's a makeup of executive and non-executive, and there are different committees looking at different things. But certainly something like an innovation panel where the Greyhound Board can help feed into that, and vice versa, and we bring in people who've got that knowledge and understanding, and of the sport, of course, I think would be a big positive. I think they would have to, if we're talking about owners specifically here, although you could say the same with trainers, they'd have to work with the owners and the trainers' representative on the board. But again, I think talking to either John Coleman or to Peter Harnden, they'd be delighted to get involved in that sort of thing.
Okay. And while we're on the subject of owners, I just wanted to ask you a simple question, really, and that is, do you think that the promoters appreciate owners in the industry? Because without owners, people buying and owning dogs, there simply wouldn't be any tracks to promote.
Almost a loaded question, Dave.
Very much a loaded question, that one.
What comes first? Is it the promoters? Is it the owners? Or is it the trainers? Because I think depending on who you speak to, everyone claims that without them, this sport wouldn't flourish. In all honesty, my answer to that, and it's not a political one, is that it's a bit of a symbiotic relationship. If you take one of those out of the link, everything else falls back down again. I mean, there'll be some that will say, well, yeah, but promoters over the years, more recently, have taken on more and more dogs. They own more dogs. So are they trying to do owners out from that way? I think that's a valid challenge. But I think at the end of the day, you've only got to look back to the situation we're in at the moment again, where tracks have been paying trainers to help support their dogs that are owned not necessarily by the trainers but by owners as well. So I think, as I said, it's symbiotic. I just wish that I think people would respect everyone that's involved in getting dogs to the track and getting them run. I mean, again, some of the tracks provide owners bonus races, which again is partly funded by the Greyhound Board. I think it's a relationship that perhaps needs to be worked on moving forward.
I definitely feel that there are dynamics in which different parties, whether it be owners looking at promoters, promoters looking at owners, in which they look at each other thinking that they're each doing themselves out of pocket for the good of the other person's cause.
I'm sure you're right. And that's about perception more than anything else, isn't it? But I'm sure And without going track by track, if you went to different tracks, you get different answers in response to all of those questions realistically. As I said, from my point of view in the here and now, what I've seen is tracks that are trying to support their trainers. The trainers have been supported by their owners, which is great. That's exactly what we would ask them to do. So I can't ask any more than that. But moving forward, yeah, maybe there are opportunities out there to try and work on those relationships.
Absolutely right. While UK greyhound racing has been on lockdown, Australian racing has been continuing. Have you watched much of that, Mark? Have you taken much of that in?
Well, I watched your interview when they were talking about Sandown, so that was good. But no, it's not something that would normally draw me, Australian dog racing.
Okay, well, obviously there have been plenty of comparisons. The most obvious difference in Australia from speaking to Mick Floyd at Sandown, which you just mentioned that you did watch, is that there is a lot of backing from the government, and the same has to be said about in Australia. Tracks are receiving grants in Australia. I read using taxpayers' money, which I couldn't even fathom happening over here. But what kind of backing could or is there in place from the UK government?
None, effectively. We don't stand any grants. I mean, you said about in Australia. I mean, if you look at New South Wales, I mean that they very nearly lost their greyhound racing, and now they're at a stage where, and I think the government is putting into the region about 40 million Australian dollars into that sport, ostensibly around welfare. But we're on different models. It's the same with the IGB, the same with America, and that doesn't mean to say that I wouldn't want to change the modelling on it. I would, but in terms of the government support around that, yes, we get support in terms of what it is that we're trying to do in trying to drive welfare standards, drive standards in terms of trainers' kennels, but there's no incentive there, and that's because of the way in which we're funded, unfortunately. But that's what it is. I mean, I certainly, in terms of if you put up against Ireland or Australia, certainly on the welfare standards, I think we are without doubt the best in the world. And that's something which our colleagues, both in Ireland and in Australia, are looking at all the time.
Okay, now you mentioned there that the reason the government perhaps doesn't stand behind ground racing is because it's funded by bookmakers. At the moment, the contribution of the bookmakers is a voluntary one at 0.6%. Of turnover. The levy in horse racing is now a statutory one. What's different? Why can't greyhound racing be the same as horse racing?
I wish it was. I really do. I mean, the horse racing betting levy board goes back to 1961 when they brought in the statutory levy a couple of years after that. I mean, they get 10% of profits on bets which exceed over £500,000. So, and that's per quarter. So their revenue income is far greater than greyhound racing will ever be. I mean, in real terms, we're on about 50% less than we used to be, say 10 years ago. Whereas horse racing has continued to get a very good return for the bookmakers. But of course, the bookmakers are tied into that because, as you said, it's a statutory levy. Now, when under the old NGRC, when they tried to look at trying to get a similar statutory levy, they were pushed back on because it was post 72 and we were in Europe at the time. So it would be European legislation that would be required to do that. So with the political support that we have got, and we've got a lot more support than we had, say, 2 or 3 years ago in relation to trying to put the sport forward, there is now new talk of having a statutory levy. Now, the fact that we are Brexiting, it should be easier to bring in domestic legislation to provide that. That's not to say it's going to be that easy, because we still have government departments like the Treasury that will push back on that because they hate any form of taxation. But all we've been trying to do over the last, certainly the time that I've been here, is say, look, bookmakers get a very good return on dog racing, and it's more than, I personally think it's more than the 0.6% that we get. And on that basis, that if we can't have a statutory levy, and the previous sports minister said that that wasn't completely off the table. But if we can't have a statutory sports levy, then bookmakers should be paying more money than they're paying now. And that's their responsibility, because that's the way the sport is funded. And for that, we can have greyhound racing go in the right direction, both on a welfare scale, but also in terms of its appeal to a whole new audience out there.
Yeah, I'll go back to 2016. There was a quote that I lift from the Parliament's Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, EFRA. And it's, we believe government should apply greater pressure to bookmakers to pay a fair reflection of all profits they make. If a voluntary agreement cannot be struck, we recommend that the government introduce a statutory levy of 1% of gross turnover. This will ensure the welfare of greyhounds is adequately funded in the future. So it is and has been discussed in the past in the right places, Mark. So we're not without hope.
No, not at all. And the chairman of that committee is a politician called Neil Parish, who's still the chair. He's just been re-elected. And I speak very regularly with Neil, and his view is very much, he's seen it. He was the person who presided over that committee back in 2015 and reported in 2016. He's seen the large steps that we've taken to try and remedy most of what was discussed within that committee's report, and he's adamant that he will want the bookmakers to be paying more. So it's not been the best time, because obviously no one's been around, and we know that bookmakers have also taken a hit on this financially, but the imperative still hasn't gone away. There should be more money paid into the sport by the bookmakers, in terms of making sure that the sport is not only looking after its welfare, but it's viable, and it's not only is it viable, that it can go forward to be another top sport again.
Let's hope so. Just one final question I wanted to ask you before Matt takes over, and it's a question I've wanted to ask you for quite a while, Mark, but I'm not sure whether it is even possible. But I know that UK greyhound racing is broadcast all over the world for bookmakers across the globe to take bets on. Has it ever been explored, the idea of an international levy? So bookmakers all over the world are basically profiting from greyhound racing in the UK. Could they be looked at to help a sport in which they are profiting from?
Yeah, unfortunately, anything that sits outside of the UK or Gibraltar, we can't touch. And we've looked at, whether when it comes to selling greyhound racing in terms of media, whether or not that can go to the international level, but it can't, unfortunately, not as it stands. So, as I said, when we got the online deal, that's certainly helped in terms of getting online contributions, and that includes obviously some of the international markets where you've got bookmakers that are either UK based or Gibraltar based. So that was one step forward, but yeah, it's a meteoric step to go to the next bit, which is trying to get money from other quarters.
I don't think it would be, but on the flip side, it does highlight just what a brilliant betting product greyhound racing is, in terms of the integrity in the UK is second to none.
Oh no, totally agree. I went out to Italy a couple of years ago, where they no longer have dog racing, and they were looking at taking it from one of the media rights people. I sat down. I don't think it's any secret. I sat down a few weeks before lockdown with Barry Hearn, and I had a very long conversation with him about not only about what he's done for darts and things like netball, but also what he's done around opening up new markets for gambling, and obviously for presenting sport as well. And he may be in his 70s now, but the light still goes on with Barry, and someone like that trying to help out greyhound racing would be immense.
I did hear that whisper, and I simply cannot just brush over that, what you've just mentioned there, because Barry Hearn being one of the most successful promoters of sport in history.
No, indeed. I think he's 72. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks after we met, he had a minor heart attack, but he's pushed through that as well. His ability to be a sports impresario and look at things like boxing. I mean darts. I did say to him, the first thing I said to him was the fact that I've been talking a lot about what he's done around darts. It's still throwing three pointy things into a bit of cork board, but at the end of the day, it's got a huge spectator attraction with it now. It draws huge betting on it as well, and a whole new demographic. We're going, people going to Alexander Palace now and to do it. And as he said, it's just a question of tinkering around with what you've got and introducing it to new audiences. That's something that we're keen to look at as well moving forward. What
was his perception of greyhound racing?
I didn't realise he used to own dogs at Walthamstow, and he used to go watching. And as he said, he pulled more than one stroke around greyhound racing and punting as well. But his view was that we're very much on a precipice. We could go one of two ways. He likes what he's seen so far in terms of what we're trying to do, but it really needs a lot more. And that conversation isn't finished yet. So one would hope that once he's recovered and we're out of this, then we can pick that conversation back up again.
Very encouraging. That is good to hear. Right, I'm just going to hide under the table for the next subject. The two dreaded words, Matt: media rights.
Yes. Now, I mean, we tend to channel our inner big brother on this show. 5 minutes before every show, I get reminded by my fellow presenter, Davina McClark, that we're live. Please do not swear. But it's our final lockdown tape, so let's go for it. Media rights. Two companies, ARC, SIS. Two separate schedules, two separate services broadcasting greyhound racing. In your view, Mark, is that detrimental to the sport to have two competitors like that?
I don't think it helps. And as I keep saying about this and a number of other things, you wouldn't build greyhound racing afresh and have this situation, because both those companies, they're on record as wanting to do each other out. They're both big companies as well. I think they've done very well for the tracks, in most cases, the ones that they're supporting with contracts. But in all honesty, Matt, what would I like to see is someone who's trying to take the sport forward. I'd like to see us on a level footing with things like the Premiership, where you've got the regulator on behalf of the Premier League is the one that's doing the sale of their media rights, and they're doing it very well. This whole collective rights system is something that, if the sport was brave enough with regards to the promoters and coming forward when the contracts came up, then perhaps we could negotiate on their behalf. I think it's been complicated with the fact that ARC now owns tracks. So they've been negotiating with themselves, so to speak. But no, it's not ideal. But at the end of the day, it's also the thing that's bringing money into the sport. So I have to recognise that.
And is there? I mean, do you do anything big as sort of an intermediary, or is it all between the tracks themselves and the media companies? They just argue it out between the GBGB, just sit back and can't get involved.
Yeah, well, it's not about can't. It's that door's always open if they want us to negotiate on their behalf. But we have never been invited to do it. I mean, I've had conversations with SIS around where we are and what conversations we've been having with government through lockdown. Because again, I mean, SIS announced their schedule at the end of was last weekend, wasn't it? If I remember rightly, in ARC a couple of days before that. We were sat here in the situation again, looking somewhat invalid in the fact that we didn't know what that schedule was going to be, because they were still negotiating with the bookmakers as to what they wanted to do. So we're a little bit, as I said, alienated from it all, which is not ideal, and it's not where I want to be realistically. But SIS, to be fair, were asking the right questions in terms of what guarantees there were, because obviously they're trying to sell the product to the bookmakers. But as I said, if we could reinvent dog racing, I would certainly look at it from a point of view of being able to have collective rights sales on the product.
And now Sheffield have announced a YouTube channel. Kinsley provide a video service. Toaster TV was incredibly popular with owners and punters alike. In Australia, the rights to the action, immediately after the race, go straight out into the world for marketing purposes. I know, I get where the bookmakers are coming from. They don't like for these free videos going out. They tend to worry, but from my point of view, the access to as much information as possible can drive up betting turnover, which in turn drives up the funding for the sport. How do you?
It sounds very much like a no-brainer, doesn't it, Matt?
Yeah, it kind of does from the outside looking in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I sat down with anybody who's on social media who looks at Lads Bible. They do some great content, and I met with some of their team, probably getting on for about 18 months ago. And apart from feeling very old in the office, because they're all about 13, I think, when they came in, very savvy, very tech savvy, very commercial savvy. But again, what they wanted was short periods of action that could be linked in with a bookmaker, showing greyhound racing. Bear in mind, greyhound racing 30 seconds or whatever it takes. They could take that and they commercialize it. The downside is that they wanted it for free, because that's how they work on their platforms. And of course, it came down to the media rights as to whether or not they could get it for free, and sadly they couldn't. So I think this again goes back to, this isn't about the panacea for all ills, but I think our commercial director is someone, he or she, when they're selected, could perhaps make more of a point of sitting down with CIS and with ARC, trying to go through some of these opportunities with them to try and push things like we're talking about here, free content, but at the end of the day will come back to us via a different route in terms of revenue.
I mean, for me personally, I've been ticking over during the lockdown, watching all the racing from Victoria on the Watchdog app. Yeah, it's a lot easier to be punting with confidence when you have access to all the videos. I mean, how do you feel when people suggest that greyhound racing in the UK should be more like Australia or more like Ireland?
There's a lot. Well, Ireland, I'll reserve judgment on, but certainly with Australia, I think they have done it in a very good commercial way, and I think that would be very good for us to do that as well. But of course, it's back to trying to convince people that it isn't just about pumping it into bookmakers' shops. It's also about trying to see what else you can do around that as well. And there are other mediums, but again, since we lost Sky, I think we've got RPG TV, and I'm glad to see that's coming back tomorrow, and I should be on there as well. But it's fairly limiting, and yet we did some surveying end of last year around people who attend tracks, but also people who are online as well. And it won't come as any surprise to you to know that a lot of people now who are could be looking at greyhound racing, I should say, that they don't watch TV. They very rarely look at a tablet. Most of what they look at is over their mobile phone. And for that reason, we should be, and even if that's in conjunction with ARC and CIS, but looking at new markets.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, there needs to be a focus on how we attract new people to the sport.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, I agree. And it's not, you look at most of what we got out of this survey, and we haven't published the results yet, because again, we're waiting for the new director to start, but most of what was said in there was very much around the demography of people. People don't just want to, dare I say it, just come dog racing. It's all about the entertainment, and it's about socializing with their friends, and it's that whole new, dog racing is a part of it. And if they get into the dog racing and they see that there's high welfare standards, and they'll have a punt, then potentially you've got a whole new audience there.
Absolutely right. We're at 90 minutes in, I think, Mark. So we'll try and pick up the pace, because I know we don't want to keep you all evening. Right, greyhound racing in the UK was the first sport to achieve UCAS accreditation back in 2010, 10 years ago. There were, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, plans to broaden your scope further, is the quote I think was used, and work towards a second accredited scheme for the residential kennels. Will this still be possible this year?
I would probably think not, in all honesty. NSF were ready to go in terms of inspections. They'd done all the training along with their own staff. They knew exactly what they needed to do, and then of course everything got locked down. So it's not to say that they can't start looking at it, but we're not in the position we wanted to be. And of course, we've already touched on some of the budgets have already been used around sort of trying to assist trainers to get their kennels up to standard. So if it isn't this year, it will certainly be into next. But again, no one's going to really be on our backs on that. We've linked in with animal welfare charities to explain what we're going to be doing, and government understand that as well. So if it isn't this year, it will certainly be in 2021.
Okay, and that may well be the answer to the next question. We interviewed Nathan Hunt last week. Real success story. Nathan was obviously part of the first class of the GBGB apprenticeship scheme. What was the feedback from that scheme, and are there plans for a second class?
Well, because of lockdown, we're still waiting to sign off all those apprentices that are on that scheme. They're all about to do their endpoint assessments. In terms of feedback, we lost some along the way. There is always an attrition rate with apprentices. Some of them left the sport. Some of them realised that there was a lot more work involved, and that included the trainers that were supporting the apprentices as well, because some of it has to be off-the-job training. So we had an attrition rate on it as well. I mean, Nathan is still on it, will be signed off, I've no doubt of that. And then, yes, we want to recruit more. I mean, the whole idea was to try and recruit school leavers, people who, perhaps didn't necessarily see greyhound racing as a career path for them. But by going to careers fairs and being involved with that, then perhaps we could get new young people into the sport. In terms of other plans, yes, we're looking at track and ground staff, having an apprenticeship scheme run out to them as well, because something at the moment you literally learn from the person who was there before you.
Absolutely.
That way. So the idea of getting that off the ground, and of course we've got the Sports Turf Research Institute still working for the Greyhound Board as well, so they'd be a part of that. So my own view is that the apprentices will grow over a period of time, but you've got to link into the right government scheme, and you've got to make sure that obviously those within the sport are going to support it as well.
Now, I know that scheme is obviously open to all ages, all walks of life,
Right.
but there is a real need for young people in the sport. 6 years ago, the Deloitte report, the average age of a trainer in 2013 was 59. 45% of all trainers were aged over 60, with only 9% aged 40 or younger. Addressing this age spread is a challenge that the industry needs to face. The next generation of trainers need to be encouraged to enter the sport to ensure its long-term health. And this is still very much the case, Mark. I mean, that was 6 years ago, the average age being 59. I wouldn't suppose it's far off being 65 now.
It may well have gone up. Yeah, indeed. And it's about how you encourage young people to come into a sport where, in some cases it's just about minimum wage. You've got, go back to Matt's question earlier on about hand to mouth with trainers. That's very much the case. We haven't necessarily moved that on. I think, from talking to trainers as well, I don't think people realise how hard it is as a profession, to come in and work long hours, not have socials. Your Fridays and Saturday nights are probably going to be spent at the track.
Yeah, it's a way of life. Yeah,
exactly. So you've got to have that passion for it. And as I said to you before, even some of the apprentices that we had who were already involved with the sport have since gone on to leave the sport, and that's going to be for a variety of reasons. So we don't underestimate the challenge that we've got ahead of us. But as a start, trying to professionalise it so that people have qualifications with it, because an apprenticeship doesn't give you a qualification, which is why we looked at it. We wanted to go one step further so that people came away with a diploma, which is what they'll do. And that diploma is interchangeable from everything from veterinary nursing to working for animal welfare charities as well. So, on the one hand, we could still lose people because they could see that the grass is greener elsewhere, but we might also attract people from those other industries into the greyhound sport as well. So, people like Nathan are a great ambassador for what we're doing. I mean, he travelled the country to go and work for Phil, and now look at him. He's now running that kennel, and will easily sell through the apprenticeship side of it as well. So, be under no illusion that we will abuse Nathan in terms of trying to get him as an ambassador for the apprenticeship thing moving forward. But there's a lot more to be done. A lot more.
Okay, this is perhaps a question I could have asked a little bit earlier on when we were talking about the commercial side of the industry. But looking at the breakdown of the BGRF expenditure in 2019, we're looking at 17.2% regulatory, 23.5% prize money, 51% welfare, and 8.3% on commercial. Where does that 8.3% go? Because commercialising the sport is obviously the way of reaching out to people and bringing in perhaps young people.
Okay, so it depends on what your interpretation of commercial is, but this is the British Greyhound Racing Fund, so this is nothing. This is money that flows across to us. So You've got in things like the grants to stadia. I mean, that was down as I think it was about £10,000 for each track if they wanted to use it. Now, the days when they could go and build restaurants and put in carpets and things like that are long gone. That money can only be spent on welfare. So that includes everything from air conditioning into tracks through to traps and things like that, which are all welfare based. So, and not all of that money's being spent, I have to say, for the grants to stadia. You've got such things as marketing is in there, both for the Greyhound board, but also at a local level as well for tracks. I think, again, off the top of my head, it's about £15,000 per track per year that they can use on marketing. But you've also got on there things, over £100,000 went to the British Bred prize money fund as well. So that was trying to boost, obviously, British Red racing. So it very quickly goes away. Plus, you've got things like the GBGB IT budget as well as included all of that.
In terms of communication channels at the GBGB, I mean, the obvious publication and how you communicate with people within the industry is the calendar. Are there other ways in which could there be a GBGB podcast, some kind of radio show? Are these things that you've explored in the past, looking at, would be open to maybe try out?
Okay, so the calendar I think is great because it's got like a lamination on it. So when it drops on the mats of the trainers' doormats through its post box, if you stand a cup of tea on it and you spill it, it won't become destroyed. I'm not sure who actually uses the calendar, if they'll use it or not. There's been some criticisms about what we've got on our website now and the fact that we went over to a new website. But all of those things for me, I think it's a large sum of money for something which is, by all standards, a very antiquated way of communicating. So I'd like to see that change. We've got to be cognizant of the fact that also that you've alluded to on more than one occasion, Dave, that we've got our trainers are of an age where they don't necessarily handle social media or electronic emails, etc., in a way that perhaps some of us can. So we need to look at all of those. But this goes back to the total communication anyway, about how we're innovative. I mean, I doubt very much that the Greyhound board would have been on this type of program perhaps 2 or 3 years ago in the same way that it is now. Same as trying to get staff to go on to RPG TV to tell the viewers on there a little bit more about what it is that the GBGB is doing. It's this whole mystery about what do you do as a regulator, as opposed to, look, here we are and this is what we're trying to do. So I think podcasts, using email, all those sorts of things can be looked at moving forward, and we're trying to do it.
Well, I think yourself, Mark, you can take a lot of credit from provide. I know one of the key words that you used when you took over, was it 3 years in August, was transparency. And you definitely, although it's looking a lot darker in the background there, you are shining a light on the GBGB by doing things like this.
Well, I hope so. I just want to say that there's a lot more to do, because there is clearly, and things like podcasts. And I mean, you've hopefully all seen the recent videos that were released around, return to racing, but also the ones around retirement of dogs. There was most notably the Kevin Hutton video that was put out again very recently. We want to release more content like that, because again, it shows those people in the sport that we value what they do, but also it shows those people who know nothing about the sport or have a warped way about the sport. It shows them the reality of what it is that we're doing.
Absolutely. And them social media videos, bits of content, Matt, have been brilliant.
Yeah, they've been absolutely exceptional. It's something that we're trying to do, and it's great to see the GBGB doing now, is to try and push the sport into the 21st century through social media, which can be such a powerful tool when it's used well. And you mentioned the Kevin Hutton one, phenomenal, brilliant piece of short film. And when did this kind of idea come in? Because I believe it was filmed at the back end of last year.
Well, we've worked with a company who did some work at Toaster, fun enough, Matt, that when we looked at what they did and how they formatted it, we thought, well, actually, we can use this as a very good medium. And again, it's not cheap, if I'm honest, but it's something that when you turn and talk about in terms of being able to get out there and people to see it, and you can, the great things with social media is you can retweet things until you're grey in the hair. but realistically, all those sorts of things are mediums of which we're now looking to explore and to promote what we're doing. There's lots of decent people in this sport who are very underrated and as good as they are. I mean, Kevin's an ideal person really, because he's almost shy, but the way that he actually comes across with his dogs and his staff as well, I mean, it's first rate, and it puts a lot of critics to sleep in terms of what we do.
I think it's incredibly important. It's a drum that we've been banging for a while now, to put this kind of stuff out there and tackle those who are anti the sport, how we can help to dispel the inaccuracies and sometimes downright lies that filter into the mainstream. I mean, could doing something like this prove crucial in helping greyhound racing back into the mainstream media?
Without a doubt. I mean, everyone considers why the Sky deal was lost, and Kevin Moretti was doing some really good work around getting that deal reinforced. And the 11th hour, we were ahead of terms and all sorts of things that Sky pulled out from that deal. Now, I went in right at the very beginning and spent a good hour and a half with them talking about our welfare standards and what we were doing and how improvements have been made on that. But we've never got to the bottom of why it was they did pull that deal. But I think, in all honesty, part of it was probably around welfare. They themselves said that they've been targeted themselves as Sky around what it was that was happening in greyhound racing. And you said there, Matt, yourself, there's a lot of mistruths in what goes on there. And I think, as collectively as a sport, we're in a much better, a much stronger place now. But we need to be, for this to become a mainstream sport again, we must be doing the absolute best by our dogs.
Yeah, I think a lot of transparency on the track is something we mentioned actually with Kevin Boothby when we interviewed him. Was sort of these behind the scenes documentaries, and there was a really good video during the week at Sandown, Australia, harking back there again, but showing the vet giving dogs the check over before they race, how they manipulate the dog and make sure they're fit to race. These kind of things, have got to be good for the industry, that we can show this kind of stuff happening and dogs being cooled down after the race and being given a drink and the sand being removed, just small things like that. It only takes 2 or 3 minute videos, but just these little touches could really help us.
Yeah, and don't forget, we've got our own video with Dr. Polly Smith and Dr. Simon Gower as well, doing exactly that in terms of what they're looking for in inspection. Again, there's been a lot of mystique about that in the past, about what is it the vet's actually looking for, and even subtleties like, is it an inspection or is it an examination? What's the vet doing, when the dog goes off the race and when it comes back from the race? All those sorts of things, again, are trying to tap into what we're doing. The fact we have a Vets Day every year and we put that out on social media to as part of their certificate of professional development, but also the fact that these things are happening, and we don't just have vets turn up and deliver races. We don't just have trainers turn up. So films like Kevin's are invaluable to show what goes on behind the scenes. And I think the days of having a minority of trainers starting to pull down the sport are, thankfully, few and far between these days.
What is it moving forward that you would like to see for the GBGB? Where do you want greyhound racing to get to?
There's probably 2 different questions there, actually. But in terms of where I want to see greyhound racing, I think we've discussed it at length tonight. I think it has the absolute ability and the right to get back into top flight sport again. It has huge integrity, huge welfare standards now, and I think that they're only going to improve. And I think there is that capability to get it to a new demography out there, a new audience level, and for the stars to become the star of the show, realistically, the dogs rather. So there is that. I mean, I think for that to happen, we've got to encourage, and again, I'm almost summarising what we said tonight, we need to get top sponsors into the sport. We need to look at prize money and make, going back to your Australia queries, as best we can, try and get that prize money raised as well. And I think, just returning again one more time to the welfare side, the days of economic euthanasias and dog not being suitable for homing, as much as we can, we would love to see the cradle to grave aspects for greyhound welfare in this sport. And when I was quizzed at the Derby final last year by the then DEFRA minister around, what was happening over in Ireland when they had the programme released over there. I've said, well, if more money was available, Minister, we could start to up the British breeding programme over in this country, where we know that there wouldn't be the same issues that they were having over in Ireland at the time. So I think there's lots that can be done. Some of it's motivated by money, but some of it's motivated by the greyhound community as well. And as I said to you right at the start of this, I've been very impressed and very proud of what I've seen with the greyhound community over the last 10 weeks in terms of how they've come together, how they've rallied around it, and ultimately that will start to show tomorrow when we start back racing again.
I mean, you mentioned the economic euthanasia. That would certainly be a huge plus for the industry to see that removed from the green card.
It will. I mean, again, people are saying, why can't you do it sooner? Well, in my experience, if you remove something, they'll look at an alternative if they're not careful. So we've got to make sure that we are absolutely right around economics before we do that. I mean, things like the injury recovery scheme that again the Greyhound Board's brought in have helped. We are due to publish data next month for the 2019 track injuries, and also in relation to retirement data as well. I think it's broadly going to be very positive, and certainly we've spoken to trainers who were on the list, so to speak, around euthanasias. Some of it's cultural, some of it was around money, but we've tried to do everything we can with regards to carrot in terms of trying to get people to stop putting their dogs to sleep unnecessarily. So, but ultimately, it goes back to us being a regulator again. If we can't deal with that and those people won't change, then they're no longer going to be fit for the sport. So it will go. I give you my assurance on that, but we need to be careful to make sure that we're changing culture in the meantime.
That's good news. One final question from me. If you had yourself a DeLorean and you could go back in time to August 2017, give yourself one piece of advice when taking over this job, what would it be?
Okay, so this is probably the toughest question of the lot, actually. So yeah, thanks for that, Matt, as a final one. I think it goes back to the question that Dave asked me about, who's more important here? Is it the owners, the trainers, or the promoters? And I think from my point of view, it's the one thing I could do more, and I will endeavour to do more of, is perhaps listening to those component parts more carefully. There is a reliance on people on the board, perhaps, but I do go out, I do talk to trainers, I do talk to owners, and those owners that have spoken to me hopefully realise that they can just pick up the phone and have those conversations with me, and that they've got some benefit out of it. So yeah, the one lesson I would be is to make sure that, again, it comes back down to communication, unsurprisingly, that I, but also the Greyhound Board, listen a lot more than we do, and respond to that as well.
Some fascinating stuff, Dave. Almost 2 hours been flown by.
Yeah, indeed. The right way to end our lockdown tapes, I think, actually, with the man that has steered the sport back, from lockdown. We're racing at the first possible opportunity, and I'd like to thank you, Mark, for that, really, because ground racing is a passion of mine, as it is Matt's and everyone in the industry, because as of tomorrow, we are back and ready to rumble. We
are, and like I said, I'm grateful for the comments, but it's not down to me. It's in some ways it's much easier because we've got a very good team around us, and as I said, the Greyhound community have pulled together on this one, and it's heartening to see. There's a lot of things that we need to sort out with greyhound racing, but the fact that people can come together, they can do their level best to get out there, and I've got every confidence that what we will see from tomorrow onwards will be very good for the sport. And I'm sorry about the lighting here, actually. I've just realised it's getting darker and darker.
Absolutely, we're drawing stumps. So tomorrow, Racing Post Greyhound TV for yourself, Mark. We can see you again then?
Yes, apparently I'm on around about 6 o'clock, I think. So yeah, I'll no doubt be commenting on the day, but I've got every confidence it will be a successful day. Okay, so tune into that. We thank you for your time, Mark. Do appreciate it. And it's been emotional, Matt. We're 6 episodes down, the end of lockdown tapes. We've enjoyed it anyway.
Yeah, it's been great fun. Been really interesting to talk to a lot of different people in the industry.
Absolutely, and hope everyone out there has enjoyed watching the episodes as well. Thanks again to Mark, to Matt. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.